Most of them grew up believing they had ordinary fathers, men described as officials, doctors, architects, soldiers who went to work and came home quiet. Mothers managed the story. Relatives filled the gaps. At home, there were no talks about camps, executions, or orders signed in ink. Then the truth arrived without warning, not through a confession, but through a school lesson, a document pulled from an archive, a trial transcript, a rumor whispered too loudly. Just one word, SS. And suddenly the names meant something else. Himmler, Mengele, Göring, Bormann. A father stopped being a parent and became part of a crime. This is the moment that rewrote their lives, when love collided with records and childhood ended at the footnote of history. Rolf Mengele's childhood began in a state of quiet protection. He was raised in Günzburg, a small Bavarian town where the war felt distant by the early 1950s. His father was spoken of carefully, almost gently. Josef Mengele was described as a doctor who had disappeared during the chaos at the end of the war, a man who never came home. There were no stories of uniforms or camps, no mention of trials. At home, his mother, Irene Schönbein, kept life narrow and controlled. She worked. She raised her son alone. She avoided the past. Outside their house, the Mengele name still carried respect. The family business, a farm machinery company, remained successful. The factory kept running. The town kept moving. Adults knew how to look away. Children were taught not to ask questions they didn't want answered. For a time, Rolf lived inside that shelter. He went to school. He played. His father existed only as an absence, not a threat. The first crack came quietly. By the time Rolf reached secondary school in the 1950s, Germany had started to speak again. Not loudly, not honestly, but enough. History lessons mentioned Auschwitz. Newspapers ran stories about missing war criminals. Names resurfaced. One day, classmates began repeating things they had overheard at home. Whispers passed between desks. Jokes landed with sharp edges. Someone said his father's name differently, not as a loss, but as a warning. Rolf didn't confront his mother. He didn't need to. The silence itself confirmed something was wrong. His father was not missing. He was wanted. That realization changed everything. Rolf began reading on his own. He searched libraries. He followed footnotes. What he found made him physically ill. Josef Mengele was not just a camp doctor. He was one of Auschwitz's most active figures. He stood on the arrival ramp as trains unloaded prisoners. With a gesture of his hand, he decided who lived and who died. Mothers were separated from children. The elderly were sent directly to the gas chambers. Others were spared only temporarily. The deeper Rolf went, the worse it became. Mengele's obsession with twins filled entire sections of testimony. Children injected with chemicals to change eye color. Limbs amputated without anesthesia. Organs removed and compared. Survivors described watching siblings die on tables meant for healing. These were not accidents or excesses. They were deliberate experiments. Rolf later said that reading these accounts triggered nausea, panic, and long periods of depression. The father he had imagined could not exist alongside what the documents showed. For years, the truth remained theoretical, a monster defined by paper and witness statements. Then it became personal. Letters began arriving from South America, handwritten notes under false names, mentions of Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina. They carried a restrained tone, almost polite. Josef Mengele was alive. He was moving. He was watching the world hunt him. Rolf answered cautiously. He did not express affection. He did not confront the past, but curiosity kept him engaged. In 1977, Rolf traveled to Sao Paulo. The meeting lasted only a few days, but it ended any remaining illusion. The man he met showed no remorse, no hesitation. Josef Mengele defended his actions as scientific necessity. He spoke about the camps without emotion. There was no apology, no recognition of victims. Rolf later described the encounter as empty, like speaking to someone already dead. And still, he did not turn him in. Rolf said later that he did not believe it was his role to deliver justice. That responsibility, he felt, belonged to courts and governments that had failed to act sooner. It was a decision that followed him for the rest of his life. After Sao Paulo, Rolf withdrew. He reduced contact. He stopped answering letters. He removed his father's name from his professional identity and began practicing law under his mother's surname, or variations of it. Colleagues did not know who he was. He avoided interviews and public events. When a magazine profile appeared in the 1980s, it would be the last time he spoke openly. He married, he had children, he moved them away from Günzburg. He built a life defined by privacy, not explanation. In 1985, police in Brazil exhumed a grave outside Sao Paulo marked with the name Wolfgang Gerhard. Investigators believed it might belong to Joseph Mengele. Rolf was contacted directly. He gave dental records from family files and submitted blood samples for comparison. Years later, forensic tests confirmed the match. Mengele had not been captured or tried. He had drowned while swimming years earlier, living under a false name until the end. Today, the Mengele name still exists in Günzburg through the machinery company that survived the war. The factory stands. The logo remains. For most people, it is just a business. For Rolf, it is a reminder of how long ignorance can last and how violently it can end. His childhood did not break when the war ended. It broke years later, in a classroom, in a library, in the realization that the man he never knew had shaped history through cruelty, and that knowing it would follow him forever. Rolf Mengele and other SS children that we'll cover didn't choose their parents. They didn't choose the uniforms, the crimes, or the names they inherited, yet they lived with the consequences for life. So what do you think? Was that fair to them? Or is history allowed to follow bloodlines? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Albert Speer Jr.'s childhood unfolded inside a carefully managed illusion. He was born in July 1934 into a world. By the time he could form memories, his family was living around Obersalzberg, the mountain enclave where Adolf Hitler and his inner circle retreated from Berlin. For a child, it felt almost domestic. Familiar faces, polite conversations, men who laughed, drank coffee, and spoke about buildings, schedules, and production targets. No raised voices, no visible violence. Prestige without blood. To Albert Jr., his father was not a criminal. He was an architect, a man trusted by Hitler himself, a man who designed grand buildings and oversaw vast industrial projects. At home, there were no uniforms laid out on tables, no stories about camps, no words like forced labor or extermination. The war existed as noise in the distance, not as something connected to family. Then it ended. In 1945, the world collapsed quickly and without explanation. Albert Speer Sr. was arrested, tried at Nuremberg, and sentenced to 20 years in Spandau prison. For Albert Jr., there was no dramatic confrontation with the truth, no moment of discovery. There was just absence. His father disappeared behind walls and gates, and his mother, Margarete, took control of what remained. The family moved away. They avoided journalists. They avoided neighbors. At home, questions were deflected or ignored. Albert Jr. later said that nothing was explained to the children. Not the trial, not the sentence, not the charges. The past was treated as something sealed off, too dangerous to touch. As a boy, he developed a stutter. Years later, he described it as coming from the tension of silence. The truth existed in the room, but it had no language. For a long time, that silence worked. Albert Jr. went to school. He tried to live a normal post-war life, but outside the house, Germany was changing. History classes returned. Books were published. Names that had once been spoken with reverence were now printed in trial transcripts. Albert Speer Sr. was not erased. He was documented. And slowly, without discussion or guidance, Albert Jr. began to understand what his father had done. Not through confession, through contrast. At home, his father was still spoken of as a gifted architect, a man who had taken responsibility at Nuremberg and paid his sentence. In books, Albert Speer Sr. appeared as Reich Minister of Armaments, the man who kept German industry running deep into the war, the one who expanded production by relying on millions of forced laborers pulled from occupied Europe and concentration camps, the one whose factories were fed by prisoners who worked until they collapsed. Albert Jr. did not confront his mother. He did not confront his father, even during prison visits. He absorbed the truth quietly. The realization did not arrive as shock. It arrived as weight, a growing understanding that his childhood comfort had been built alongside immense suffering. That knowledge reshaped his choices. Albert Jr. followed his father into architecture, but deliberately turned away from the style that had defined the Nazi state. He rejected monumentality. No massive stone halls, no intimidating symmetry, no architecture meant to dwarf human beings. Instead, he focused on cities meant to be lived in, public parks, walkable neighborhoods, sustainable planning. His work emphasized people over power. When he signed his projects, he signed Albert Speer, not Jr., not the son. He never tried to reclaim the family legacy, and he never tried to erase it either. He treated the name as something to be handled carefully, without explanation. As his career grew, opportunities came with conditions, interviews, profiles, retrospectives. He declined most of them. When asked about his father, he was precise and restrained. He said he was not interested in redemption stories. He was not trying to rehabilitate Albert Speer Sr. He once explained it simply. He worked to clean the name, not to redeem it. To separate himself, not to defend the past. That separation extended to his own family. Albert Speer Jr. had children, but he kept them entirely out of public view. No interviews, no appearances, no family narratives offered to the press. He understood how easily history could swallow descendants, and he refused to feed it. Silence, the same force that had shaped his childhood, became a tool he used deliberately. When his father was released from Spandau in 1966, the distance remained. There was no public reconciliation, no joint interviews. Albert Jr. did not step into his father's shadow. Even when Albert Speer Sr. published memoirs and became a public figure again, the silence held. Albert Speer Jr. died in 2017 at the age of 83. His funeral was private. No cameras, no speeches about legacy, no attempts to frame his life as atonement or absolution. Just a quiet end to a life built around careful distance. For Albert Speer Jr., discovery did not come through accusation or exposure. It came through what was never said, through history books filling in the spaces his childhood had left blank, through the realization that silence could protect a child, but it could also shape him permanently. While some children learn the truth and walk away quietly, others refuse to walk away at all. Gudrun Himmler's childhood unfolded at the very center of power, wrapped in comfort and certainty. She was born in 1929, at a time when the SS was still presented as an elite order, not a criminal machine. Her world was orderly and protected. Servants moved quietly through the house. SS officers came and went with deference. Her father, Heinrich Himmler, was not a distant figure. He wrote letters. He brought gifts. He called her Puppy. To Gudrun, he was attentive, gentle, and proud of her. Nothing in her early life suggested fear or violence, only structure, privilege, and devotion. Her mother reinforced that image. Margarete Himmler believed deeply in the Nazi cause and shielded her daughter from anything that might fracture the family story. Gudrun attended elite schools, visited her father's offices, and stood beside him at public events. The war existed in the background, but never as horror. Camps, executions, and deportations were not part of her vocabulary. She grew up believing her father was a protector of Germany, not the architect of mass murder. The collapse of that world came suddenly and without explanation. In 1945, Himmler was captured by Allied forces and killed himself while in custody. Gudrun was still a teenager. Within days, she and her mother were arrested. The uniforms disappeared. The servants were gone. The certainty evaporated. They were moved from place to place under guard, passed between Allied authorities like evidence rather than people. For the first time, Gudrun was confronted directly with accusations against her father. During interrogations, officials asked about his habits, his personality, his private life. At Nuremberg, she was exposed to testimony describing the SS as a system of terror and extermination. Her father's name was no longer spoken with reverence. It was spoken with disgust. This was the moment of discovery, and Gudrun rejected it. She did not break down. She did not express doubt. Witnesses later recalled her composure. When asked about her father's crimes, she denied them outright. She insisted he would never have done such things. Even as documents accumulated and survivor testimony mounted, Gudrun clung to the image she had known as a child. The evidence did not replace her memory. It threatened it, and so she dismissed it. After her release in 1946, Gudrun disappeared from public view. She and her mother settled quietly in rural northern Germany. On the surface, it looked like withdrawal. In reality, it was consolidation. Gudrun did not abandon her father's world. She preserved it. In the 1950s, she became involved with Stille Hilfe, a discreet support network for former SS members and their families. Officially, it offered humanitarian assistance. In practice, it raised funds, arranged legal defense, and helped war criminals evade capture. Gudrun did not operate as a public figure. She worked quietly, efficiently, and with conviction. Her loyalty expanded beyond family into ideology. This was the moral line. At this point, Gudrun was no longer just rejecting accusations about her father. She was actively assisting men accused of crimes similar to his. One of the beneficiaries of the network was Klaus Barbie, later known as the Butcher of Lyon. Helping him and others like him required accepting that the post-war trials were lies, that survivor testimony was fabrication, and that the SS had been misunderstood. Gudrun accepted all of it. She never married. She never had children. People close to her offered different explanations. Some said she wanted a quiet life. Others believed she feared passing on the Himmler name. What is certain is that she never publicly distanced herself from her father. She denied the gas chambers. She described Himmler as a victim. She spoke of betrayal, not responsibility. As decades passed, Germany changed. Memorials were built. Education became explicit. The crimes of the SS were documented in overwhelming detail. Gudrun remained unmoved. Where others saw proof, she saw attack. Where history demanded reckoning, she chose resistance. She lived quietly until her death in 2018. There were no apologies, no statements of regret, no acknowledgments of victims. The girl who had grown up in silk dresses and secure belief carried that belief intact to the end. Gudrun Himmler did discover the truth about her father, and for some children of the Reich, discovery did not lead to reckoning at all. It hardened belief, setting the stage for another daughter who would lose everything and still refuse to let go. Edda Göring's childhood began inside a carefully staged dream. She was born in 1938 at Karenhall, a massive estate hidden deep in the forest north of Berlin. To her, it felt like a palace. Wide halls, high ceilings, guards at the gates, servants everywhere. Her father, Bormann Jr, was one of the most powerful men in Germany. Her mother, Emmy Sonnemann, was a famous actress, and Adolf Hitler himself was her godfather. For a child, this world felt safe, glamorous, and permanent. Edda did not grow up hearing about war the way other children did. She saw ceremonies, not bombings, art, not suffering. Her father collected paintings, tapestries, sculptures, and gold. The walls of Karenhall were lined with masterpieces taken from across Europe. At the time, Edda did not know they were stolen from Jewish families and occupied countries. To her, they were simply part of home. She appeared in magazines as the model Nazi child, blonde hair, white dresses, smiling beside her father. The regime used her image to sell innocence and pride. No one explained where the wealth came from. No one talked about prisons or camps. Her father was presented as a hero of the state, not a man helping run a system of terror. Then everything collapsed. As the war turned against Germany, Karenhall was no longer a symbol of power. It became a liability. In 1945, as Allied forces closed in, Göring ordered the estate destroyed to keep it from falling into enemy hands. The palace was blown apart. The paintings were scattered or seized. The life Edda knew ended before she could understand why. Her father surrendered to American forces and was put on trial at Nuremberg. Edda was only 7. She did not attend the court. She did not hear the testimony. She learned about the trial through adults who spoke carefully, if at all. Then, in 1946, just hours before his execution, Bormann Göring killed himself with a hidden cyanide capsule. Edda lost her father without warning or explanation. What followed was not education. It was deprivation. She and her mother were placed under Allied supervision. Their property was seized. Bank accounts were frozen. Jewelry disappeared into evidence rooms. The family name no longer opened doors. It closed them. They moved into small apartments. Money was scarce. Former friends vanished. Edda went from palace corridors to ordinary streets almost overnight. This was how she discovered the truth. Not through books, not through documents, but through rejection. Every court ruling that denied her claims, every confiscation notice, every official decision that labeled her father's wealth as stolen property. Over time, Edda understood what the world thought of Bormann Göring. She learned that he was not remembered as a decorated officer or a collector of art, but as a central figure in Nazi crimes. The reason everything had been taken was simple. It had never been his to give her. Edda did not respond by by publicly defending the Nazi system. She never denied the camps or attacked historians, but she also never condemned her father. Instead, she focused on what she believed had been taken unfairly from her. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Edda filed lawsuits against the German state. She tried to reclaim art, jewelry, and personal items seized after the war. One case became especially well known. She claimed ownership of a painting by Lucas Cranach the Elder, Madonna, and Child, arguing it had been a personal gift to her family. The courts rejected the claim. The painting, they ruled, had been looted and could not be returned. Every case failed. Each ruling reinforced the same message. Her childhood had been built on stolen ground. Edda adjusted her life quietly. She trained as a dental assistant. She lived modestly in Munich. Neighbors described her as polite and reserved. She avoided interviews and refused to speak in detail about her father. When asked, she framed her losses as personal tragedy, not historical justice. She spoke of a child who had lost everything, not of victims who had lost far more. She never married. She never had children. Some believed it was a choice to protect another generation from the Göring name. Others believed she simply could not let go of the world she had lost. What remained clear was this: she never publicly rejected her father. Not once.
Edda Göring died in 2018.
She did not leave behind a statement. She did not renounce her past. She did not reconcile her childhood with history. Her discovery did not come with anger or denial. It came with loss, and her response was not reckoning, but quiet resistance. While Edda Göring discovered the truth through documents, other children of the Reich discovered it through ruin. Martin Bormann Jr.'s childhood began in a world where power felt ordinary. He was born in 1930 and raised at Obersalzberg, the mountain retreat where Nazi leaders lived like a closed community. To him, it did not feel dangerous or secretive. It felt familiar. Adolf Hitler was not a distant figure from newsreels. He was Uncle Adolf. Men in uniform came and went like neighbors. Conversations stopped when children entered the room, but nothing ever felt threatening. There were no visible camps, no screams, just routine, order, and privilege. As a child, Martin Jr. believed his family was part of something important and respected. His father, Martin Bormann, was always busy, always close to Hitler, always treated as indispensable. At home, ideology blended into daily life. Loyalty was normal. Questions were unnecessary. For Martin Jr., this was simply how the world worked. That world vanished in May 1945. During the final days of the Battle of Berlin, his father disappeared. There was no goodbye, no explanation. One day he was there, the next, he was gone. For Martin Jr., still a teenager, rumors filled the space. Adults whispered that his father had escaped, that he had fled to South America, that he was hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. For years, Martin Jr. lived inside that uncertainty. His father was neither alive nor dead, neither guilty nor cleared, just missing. After the war, Martin Jr. was removed from the world he had known. He was placed in Catholic boarding schools, far from Obersalzberg and far from Nazi influence. The transition was abrupt. The certainty of childhood was replaced by discipline, prayer, and silence. No one explained what his father had done. No one guided him through history. His discovery of the truth began slowly, through distance rather than confrontation. He converted to Catholicism as a young man. For some, it looked like rejection of his father's ideology. For others, it looked like escape. Martin Jr. entered the priesthood and committed himself fully. He traveled to the Congo as a missionary in the 1960s, living among the poor and teaching in difficult conditions. It was a stark contrast to the insulated elite world of his childhood. Faith became his answer to uncertainty. But even faith could not resolve the central question: had his father escaped justice? That question was finally answered in 1972. Construction workers digging near Berlin's Lehrter Bahnhof uncovered human remains. Forensic investigations followed. Years later, the remains were identified as those of Martin Bormann Sr. He had not fled. He had not lived quietly in exile. He had died in Berlin in 1945 while trying to escape the collapsing Reich. For Martin Jr., this discovery brought closure and collapse at the same time. The mystery was solved, but the truth was heavier than the rumors. His father had not escaped responsibility through cunning. He had simply vanished into death before facing trial. There would be no courtroom, no testimony, no reckoning. The past remained unresolved. Martin Jr. continued his work as a priest and teacher in Austria. He lived quietly. He avoided the media. He did not write memoirs or defend his father publicly. Unlike some children of Nazi leaders, he did not cling to denial or nostalgia, but he also did not confront the past openly. His response was inward, spiritual, private. Then, decades later, the story took another turn. In 2011, abuse allegations surfaced. Former students accused Bormann Jr of sexual abuse and physical violence during his time as a teacher. By then, he was elderly and suffering from dementia. He could not respond to the claims. There was no public trial, no courtroom confrontation. The Catholic Church reviewed the cases and awarded compensation through the Klasnik Commission. Once again, there was silence instead of answers. Bormann Jr spent his final years in a care home. He rarely spoke about his father, the war, or his childhood. He had no known children. Whatever legacy he carried ended with him. When he died, there were no public statements, no attempts to frame his life as redemption or tragedy, just a quiet burial arranged by the church. For Bormann Jr., discovery did not arrive as a single moment. It arrived in fragments, through disappearance, through rumor, through a body found decades later. His childhood belief system collapsed, not in one blow, but through slow erosion.
Some children of the Reich searched for redemption.
Others, no matter how far they walked, found the shadow still waiting behind them. That felt completely normal. He was born in 1939 in occupied Poland and raised inside grand buildings that looked like palaces, thick carpets, tall windows, servants moving quietly through the rooms. As a child, he did not know those homes had belonged to Jewish families who were deported or killed. To him, it was simply where his family lived. His father, Hans Frank, was a powerful official. His mother, Brigitte, dressed well, hosted guests, and spoke proudly about their place in the world. There was no sense of danger, no talk of executions, no mention of camps. The war existed somewhere else. After Germany collapsed, that world fell apart. His father was arrested, tried at Nuremberg, and executed in 1946. Niklas was still young. He did not understand what his father had done. At home, his mother controlled the story. She spoke of betrayal, of injustice. She described her husband as a great man who had served Germany honorably. She never apologized. She never expressed doubt. Most of Niklas's siblings accepted her version and chose silence. Niklas did not. As he grew older, he began reading on his own. He opened trial transcripts. He read court records. He studied documents written by people who had survived his father's rule. The discovery did not come through rumor or accusation. It came through paper, orders signed in ink, reports listing executions, deportation schedules, testimony describing mass murder carried out under his father's authority. Hans Frank was not a distant figure in the genocide. He was central to it. Niklas learned that his father had overseen occupied Poland, signed off on forced labor, and played a direct role in the deportation and murder of millions of Jews. The contrast between his childhood comfort and the reality in the documents shattered him. He later said that reading the files felt like losing his father all over again, this time for good. His reaction was immediate and public. In 1987, Niklas published a book titled My Father, a Murderer. It was not careful or forgiving. He called his father exactly what the records showed him to be. The book caused outrage in Germany. Some praised Niklas for his honesty. Others accused him of betrayal. His own family distanced themselves from him. Niklas did not back down. He spent the rest of his life speaking openly. He visited schools. He attended memorial events. He confronted Holocaust deniers directly. He refused the idea that silence was a form of healing. For him, silence was how the crimes had survived so long. Niklas made one choice that defined his personal life. He decided not to have children. He said the Frank bloodline should end with him. It was not a gesture of guilt, but of responsibility. He did not want another generation to carry the weight of a name tied so clearly to murder.
Today, he lives quietly. He is not wealthy. He holds no office, but he has never taken back a word he wrote.
Speaking out was how Niklas survived the truth. Others, as you'll see next, survived by disappearing entirely. Katharina Goebbels' life began without a place in the world. She was born from an affair that was never meant to be public. Her father was Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's father's chief propagandist. Her mother was Lida Barova, a famous actress. When the relationship was discovered, it caused panic inside the Nazi leadership. Goebbels was forced to end it. Barova was pushed out of Germany. Katharina was never acknowledged. No documents, no family visits, no name she was allowed to use. As a child, Katharina lived in quiet confusion. She moved often with her mother. Adults avoided questions. There were no stories about her father, just tension and silence. To her, this was normal. She did not grow up with power or privilege. She grew up with absence. The discovery came through shame, not explanation. After the war, Barova was arrested for collaboration and imprisoned. Katharina was sent to relatives. It was during this time that fragments of the truth surfaced. Whispers about who her father really was, why doors closed so quickly, why her mother was watched, why they were never safe in one place for long. Unlike other children of Nazi leaders, Katharina never faced trial records or public accusations. Her discovery was personal and isolating. She learned that her father was one of the most hated men in Europe, and that acknowledging him would destroy what little life she had left. So she chose disappearance. As an adult, Katharina changed her name. She refused interviews. She rejected every attempt by journalists and filmmakers to document her story. She avoided photographs and official records. Even people who lived near her often had no idea who she was. When her mother died in 2000, old letters and recordings resurfaced and confirmed the truth. But Katharina remained silent. Her survival did not come through denial or confrontation. It came through erasure.